The gray Texas dawn rolled in over Fort Redwood, the sky bruised with streaks of red and gold. A convoy of Humvees hummed past the gates, their headlights slicing through the mist. Amid the commotion, a single black SUV pulled up to the administrative building. Inside sat Sergeant Alyssa Monroe, a 30-year-old Army medic with sharp green eyes and a posture that spoke of quiet discipline. She'd been stationed in Iraq, Afghanistan, and even spent a year training recruits in Maryland. But this assignment felt different. The orders had been abrupt: permanent transfer to Fort Redwood, Texas. Report immediately to Bravo Company. No explanation, no briefing. Just a signature and a plane ticket. As she stepped out of the vehicle, the warm air hit her face. The base smelled of dust and diesel, and something else she couldn't name yet. She adjusted her duffel, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the barracks. The first thing she noticed wasn't the soldiers. It was the silence. For a base this large, it was too quiet. Conversation stopped when she passed. A few soldiers saluted out of formality, but their eyes didn't meet hers. There was a tension here, thick and visible, but unmistakable. At the entrance of the medical unit, a man in his 40s with a crew cut and permanent frown extended his hand. "Sergeant Monroe, welcome to Bravo Company. I'm Captain Dean Keller, your commanding officer." His handshake was firm, too firm, as if to test her strength. "Sir," Alyssa said evenly. "Glad to be here. I'm eager to get started." Keller gave a curt nod, his eyes flicking over her uniform. "We run things tight here, Sergeant. Bravo Company's no place for oversensitivity. We're training soldiers, not nursing them." Alyssa tilted her head slightly. "Understood, sir. My duty is to keep them combat ready. I don't plan to do less." Keller's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Good. You'll fit in, as long as you remember your place." He walked away without another word, leaving her standing in the hallway, heart thudding with unease. Later that morning, she began her rounds through the training fields. Dozens of recruits were running drills under the scorching sun, carrying rifles and shouting cadence. The sergeants barked orders with a sharpness that made the air itself seem to flinch. Alyssa moved from one station to another, checking hydration levels, monitoring heart rates, patching small scrapes. She noticed bruises that didn't come from normal training, purple marks across ribs, backs, and shoulders. When she asked about them, the recruits avoided her eyes. One young private whispered, "Ma'am, please don't ask questions. It'll only make things worse." That night, she sat on her bunk, reviewing medical reports. Dozens of entries had the same vague notes: injury due to fall during obstacle course. The handwriting was the same on most forms. Her instincts screamed something was off. She decided to report it to the base medical officer, Major Patterson, a man she'd only met once during orientation. His office was dimly lit, papers piled high, the air thick with the scent of burnt coffee. "Sir," she began carefully, "I've noticed a pattern in the recruits' injuries. They're consistent with blunt force trauma, not training accidents." Patterson sighed without looking up from his desk. "Sergeant, Bravo Company is tough. Always has been. Those men need discipline, not pity." "With respect, sir," Alyssa pressed, "discipline doesn't explain broken ribs or concussions." Now Patterson did look up. His eyes were tired, but his tone was sharp. "You're new here. Let me give you some advice. Don't dig where you don't need to. You'll make enemies fast." Alyssa stood there, stunned. "So we just ignore it?" He leaned back in his chair. "No, we handle things internally. You'll learn." That was the moment she knew. Something rotten ran deep in Fort Redwood. Days turned into weeks. Alyssa worked tirelessly, but the tension grew heavier. The sergeants, especially Sergeant Kane, a muscular, loud man with a reputation for breaking weak soldiers, seemed to watch her every move. Once, during an early morning formation, Kane smirked and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Heard the doc thinks she's here to save us from ourselves." Laughter followed. Alyssa ignored it, but her stomach twisted. That night, she heard a thud outside her barracks. When she opened the door, she found her medical kit dumped on the ground, scissors snapped, bandages unrolled, a note pinned to the door. "Stay in your lane." She stared at it for a long time, her jaw set. Then she picked up every piece, cleaned the mess, and locked her door. She wasn't the type to run. A week later, she was called to an emergency at the training yard. A trainee had collapsed during a forced march in full gear. Alyssa sprinted there, her boots pounding the dirt. When she arrived, she froze. 2 sergeants were shouting at the soldier on the ground, kicking dust at his face. "Get up, you worthless piece of," one yelled. "Stop," Alyssa barked. "He's dehydrated." "He needs an 4, not an insult." Kane turned, sweat dripping from his temples, eyes blazing. "This is my field, not your clinic, Sergeant. You want to play nurse? Go back to the hospital." She glared at him, kneeling beside the fallen soldier. "My orders come from higher than you, Sergeant." "He's coming with me." Kane's jaw clenched. For a second, she thought he'd strike her. Instead, he spat at the ground and muttered, "You'll regret that." She treated the soldier for severe heat stroke. When he regained consciousness, he whispered, "They'll punish me for passing out. Please don't report it." Alyssa hesitated, then promised quietly, "I'll handle it." She wrote her report anyway, citing physical abuse observed during training. She submitted it through official channels and waited. 2 days later, she checked the digital log. The report was gone, deleted, not reassigned, not reviewed, gone. That same evening, Captain Keller summoned her to his office. "Sergeant," he said smoothly, "I've been informed you filed a rather exaggerated complaint." "Sir, nothing was exaggerated. A trainee was assaulted." He smiled, thin and cold. "You need to understand how Bravo Company operates. We build soldiers, not victims. Don't interfere again." Her heart pounded. "Sir, if you mean to condone, that's an order, Sergeant Monroe." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "And remember, disobeying an order here doesn't end well." She saluted, turned sharply, and walked out, her face burning with restrained fury. That night, Alyssa sat alone in the dark barracks. The air was heavy with the hum of silence, the low buzz of fluorescent lights. She could still hear Keller's words echoing in her head. She reached under her bed and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, the kind she'd used during her deployments overseas. On the first page, she wrote, "Fort Redwood, Day 17. Something is very wrong here." Then she began listing everything. Names, dates, injuries, threats, and every strange order that didn't make sense. When she finished, she exhaled slowly and whispered to herself, "If they think fear will keep me quiet, they're wrong." Outside, thunder rolled across the Texas plains, shaking the windows. The sound was deep, like the earth itself warning her. Something dark was about to surface. And in the shadows of Fort Redwood, the first crack in the wall of silence had just appeared. The sun at Fort Redwood rose like a punishment. By 0700 hours, the Texas heat already shimmered off the asphalt, turning the parade ground into a griddle. Sergeant Alyssa Monroe jogged toward the training fields, clipboard in hand, sweat sticking her sleeves to her arms. Today, Bravo Company was running endurance drills 15 miles with full packs. She was supposed to monitor hydration, but what she really wanted was to observe how the sergeants treated their men when no one higher up was watching. Kane was on duty again. He paced the line of recruits like a wolf, barking orders sharp enough to cut skin. You fall, you crawl. You crawl, you bleed. You stop, you die. His voice echoed off the bleachers. Alyssa watched him kick at a water jug lying in the dust. The recruits flinched. None dared pick it up. She noted everything: time, temperature, behavior in her small notebook. She was learning that evidence mattered more than anger. By the 7th mile, one of the younger trainees, Private Luis Ramirez, barely 20, stumbled. His knees buckled, pack sliding off his shoulders. Kane was on him instantly. Get up! Kane roared, shoving him with the toe of his boot. Ramirez tried. His legs trembled like wet branches. Sergeant, I can't. The second sergeant, Doherty, laughed. You heard him. Up, princess. He drove a boot into Ramirez's ribs. Elisa's training instincts overrode every warning. She dropped her clipboard and sprinted forward. Back off, she shouted. He's in heat distress. Kane turned on her, veins bulging in his neck. Step away, medic. He's fine. He's about to go into shock, Alyssa snapped, kneeling beside Ramirez. She felt for a pulse weak, thready. His skin was dangerously hot. He needs IV fluids now. Kane's hand clamped around her shoulder. You're out of line. Then write me up, she said, ripping her arm free. But I'm not letting a soldier die for your pride. A few recruits had stopped running, watching with wide eyes. Kane's gaze flicked around, calculating. For a moment, she thought he might strike her, but instead he spat in the dirt. Fine, he's yours. But if he doesn't make it, that's on you. Elisa waved over 2 privates to carry Ramirez to shade. As she prepped in 4, she could feel Kane's stare drilling into her back. Ramirez recovered after 2 liters of saline and a night in the infirmary. He kept whispering apologies. I didn't mean to make trouble, ma'am. Alyssa assured him it wasn't his fault, but when she checked on him the next morning, his bunk was empty. Transferred, according to the logbook. No destination listed. She found the paperwork suspiciously blank where the signature line should have been. Later that day, Keller called her into his office. You overstepped, Sergeant, he said flatly. Next time, remember your chain of command. My chain of command doesn't override medical protocol, she replied. Keller leaned back, a thin smile spreading. Careful, Monroe. There's a difference between bravery and insubordination. The message was clear. Stop asking questions. That evening, Alyssa sat alone in the mess hall, staring at the untouched food on her tray. Laughter echoed from the far tables. Kane and his crew, telling stories, mocking the bleeding heart medic. She heard her name once, followed by chuckles. She finished her meal in silence and returned to her barracks. Her roommate, Corporal Danvers, was cleaning her rifle. You made Kane mad, Danvers said quietly. I saved a man's life. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying be careful. People who cross him. Don't stay long. Elisa studied Danvers' face. There was fear there, real fear. Has he hurt you? Danvers hesitated, then shook her head. Doesn't matter. Nothing changes. When Danvers left for night watch, Alyssa locked the door, opened her notebook, and began writing, Day 23. Private Ramirez collapsed during drill. Physical assault witnessed. Filed report. Expect interference. She snapped a photo of the entry on her phone and emailed it to her private account. If they deleted her report again, she'd have proof outside the system. 3 days later, a courier dropped an envelope on her bunk. No sender, just her name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Stop asking questions or someone else gets hurt. Her stomach turned to ice. She folded the note carefully, slid it into her notebook, and locked it inside her footlocker. At dawn, she reported for another drill, pretending nothing was wrong. The recruits lined up, eyes forward, sweat already beading under helmets. Kane walked by, grin smug. "Morning, Doc. Ready for another rescue mission?" "Always," she said coolly. During the march, she noticed one recruit limping badly. When she tried to intervene, Kane barked, "Ignore him. Toughens the ankle." The recruit bit his lip and kept moving. Elisa's hands shook with fury, but she forced herself to breathe. She couldn't save anyone if she got thrown out. She needed evidence solid, undeniable. That night, she set a small GoPro camera inside her medical bag, lens peeking through a tear in the fabric. If command wouldn't listen to her words, they'd have to face the images. 2 nights later, the abuse escalated. Kane and Doherty dragged 5 trainees into the obstacle pit for corrective training. Elisa, pretending to inventory supplies nearby, saw them make the men crawl through mud while shouting insults. When one trainee hesitated, Kane kicked him in the side, sending him sprawling. Elisa's camera caught everything. Her pulse raced. Every instinct screamed to intervene, but she forced herself to stay hidden. She needed the whole scene. After 20 agonizing minutes, the session ended. The trainees limped away, silent, mud-covered. Kane lit a cigarette and laughed. "They'll thank me when they're soldiers," he muttered. Elisa waited until the area cleared before retrieving her bag. Her hands trembled as she checked the footage. It was there clear as daylight. Proof. She backed up the file to a hidden flash drive and tucked it into her sock. The next morning, she requested a meeting with Major Patterson. "I have visual evidence of misconduct," she told the secretary. Patterson waved her in, but didn't look pleased. She placed the flash drive on his desk. "Watch it, sir, please." He sighed, slid it into his laptop, and pressed play. As the footage rolled, his jaw tightened. When it ended, he closed the laptop slowly. "Where did you get this?" "I recorded it," she said. "You can't ignore this anymore." He rubbed his temples. "You shouldn't have done that, Sergeant. You could be charged for unauthorized surveillance." Elisa stared at him in disbelief. "You're worried about paperwork when men are being beaten?" Patterson looked genuinely torn. "You don't understand how many careers this could destroy. If this leaks, it won't just be Kane. It'll be Keller, the battalion, maybe higher. Fort Redwood's reputation. Then maybe it deserves to burn," she cut in. He froze, then leaned forward. "Leave the footage with me. I'll handle it quietly." She hesitated, but finally nodded. "Just make sure it's handled, sir." When she left the office, her gut told her she'd made a mistake. By nightfall, her fears proved right. She returned to her quarters to find her bag overturned, her notebook missing, her locker pried open. The only thing untouched was the hidden flash drive in her sock drawer. She'd made a duplicate the night before. The next day, Patterson avoided her gaze completely. When she asked about the footage, he muttered something about chain of custody review. She knew he'd buried it. That evening, Danvers found her sitting alone by the medical tent, staring into the sunset. "You tried, didn't you?" Danvers asked softly. "I'm not done trying," Elisa said. "They think they can scare me, but I'm done playing by their rules." Danvers swallowed hard. "Then be careful. They'll come for you next." Elisa stood, shoulders squared against the crimson horizon. Let them. I'm done watching good people bleed for someone else's ego. As the last light faded behind the barracks, the sound of distant yelling carried across the field another drill. Another night of pain disguised as discipline. She turned toward it, jaw set. The darkness of Fort Redwood wasn't hidden anymore. She had seen it, recorded it, felt its breath on her neck. And though she didn't yet realize it, that small act of defiance the hidden camera The flash drive tucked away had just lit the fuse that would one day bring 3 generals thundering through those gates. The morning after Alessa's report vanished, Fort Redwood looked the same. Drills echoing, boots pounding, voices cutting through the humid Texas air. But for Alessa, everything felt different. The moment she stepped onto the parade ground, she could feel eyes following her. Conversation stopped when she walked by. Laughter rose behind her back. Rumors had begun to spread. Someone had told the others she'd gone behind the unit's back, that she was a snitch. In Bravo Company, that label was more dangerous than any battlefield. When she entered the medical tent, her equipment was scattered across the floor. Needles spilled, drawers open, gauze soaked with dust. Her locker door hung crooked, a boot print smudged on the metal. At the bottom, lying face up, was a photograph, her own, from deployment in Afghanistan. Someone had drawn a red X across her face. She froze, then clenched her jaw. She knew exactly what this was, a message. Captain Keller called her to his office before noon. He didn't invite her to sit. "I've received complaints," he said, his tone measured. "Apparently, your attitude is creating tension in the unit." "My attitude?" Alessa repeated. "Sir, I've done nothing but my job." Keller's expression hardened. "You've been questioning command decisions, interfering with training, and filing reports without clearance. This isn't your personal crusade, Sergeant. With respect, sir, it's my duty to protect soldiers. If I see abuse," he slammed a folder on the desk. "Enough. You're here to follow orders, not play detective." Alessa stood at attention, fists tight at her sides. "Understood, sir." He smirked slightly. "Good, because if you keep pushing, I'll make sure you're reassigned to a post where you'll never touch another report again. Dismissed." She saluted sharply and left, her pulse hammering. Outside, the wind whipped sand across the courtyard, stinging her face. She wanted to scream, to tell someone what was happening, but who would listen when even the medical officer had buried her evidence? That night, the harassment escalated. Her bunk sheets were soaked with bleach. Her canteen filled with sand. Someone spray-painted the words "Rat Doc" on her door in black. She found Corporal Danvers cleaning her rifle and asked quietly, "Did you see who did it?" Danvers looked pale. "Monroe, listen. Don't fight them. You can't win. Just lay low for a while." "Lay low?" Alessa repeated. "You think silence keeps you safe? It just makes them stronger." Danvers shook her head. "You don't understand. People disappear here. Transfers, discharges, accidents during drills. It happens all the time." Alessa swallowed hard. "Then it stops now." The following week, she was reassigned, without explanation, to menial tasks: cleaning supply closets, inventorying expired bandages, washing vehicles. Kane made sure she knew it was his doing. "Enjoy your promotion, Doc," he said one morning, tossing a mop her way. From battlefield hero to janitor. Big step down. Alessa didn't respond. She just kept scrubbing, her face a mask of calm while anger burned underneath. But the humiliation wasn't enough for Kane. During a weapons maintenance drill 2 days later, he made his move. The soldiers were lined up, practicing simulated evacuations under the Texas sun. Kane strutted down the line, barking orders. Alessa stood nearby, checking vitals, pretending to jot notes on her clipboard. When one recruit slipped on the gravel, Kane grabbed him by the collar and threw him down. "You think enemies wait for your balance?" The recruit didn't answer. Kane turned, noticing Alessa watching. His smirk widened. "Something to add, Sergeant?" "Just that head trauma isn't part of the training curriculum," she said dryly. The laughter that followed wasn't friendly. Kane stepped closer until his shadow fell over her. You always have something smart to say, don't you? Only when stupidity's loud, she replied. His jaw tightened. Without warning, he slammed a shoulder into her, sending her stumbling backward. The soldiers went silent. Elisa caught herself before hitting the ground. That'll go great in a report, she said, voice steady. Kane leaned in close, his breath hot and foul. You really think anyone's reading your reports? He walked off, leaving her shaking, not from fear, but from rage. That evening, Elisa went straight to the infirmary. Her shoulder throbbed, and a bruise was already forming. The on-duty medic, Specialist Rowan, barely looked up from his clipboard. Another accident? He asked. Not an accident, Elisa said. Assault. Rowan's pen hovered. You sure you want that word on record? Yes, she said. Put it in the file. He hesitated, then wrote training contact, minor injury. She stared at the paper. That's not what I said. He sighed. Monroe, I've got orders from above. If I write assault, this whole clinic gets audited. I'm sorry. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You're part of it too. Rowan didn't meet her eyes. I'm trying to keep my job. She walked out, fury boiling through her veins. The next night, she sat in her room, lights off, notebook open. Outside, laughter echoed down the hall. She flipped through her notes. Every date, every incident, every threat. It wasn't enough. They were covering everything faster than she could report it. She pulled out her phone, opened the encrypted email app she'd used during her deployments, and typed a new message. To Inspector General Office, Department of the Army Subject. Urgent. Misconduct and abuse at Fort Redwood. Attached are field logs. Injury records and names of personnel involved in unauthorized physical abuse. Requesting immediate review. SGT. Elisa Monroe, her finger hovered over send for a long moment. Once she did this, there would be no turning back. She pressed it. The retaliation came faster than she'd expected. At dawn, she reported for duty and found her vehicle's tires slashed. When she went to retrieve medical supplies, her access card had been revoked. Her ID photo was suddenly under review. Officially, she didn't exist on the roster for that day. During lunch, Kane cornered her near the storage building. You really don't learn, do you? I don't scare easy, she said. He smirked. Good. You'll need that. Before she could react, he shoved her backward against the metal wall. Her head struck the panel hard enough to make her ears ring. Kane leaned in close, voice low. Next time you won't get up. She stared at him, dazed, tasting blood on her lip. You just made your biggest mistake. He released her and walked away as if nothing had happened. Elisa stood there for a moment, dizzy, then slid to the ground. The world tilted sideways. She woke up in the infirmary an hour later, a bandage around her head. The medic said she'd suffered a mild concussion. You fell, he said flatly. I didn't fall. He looked nervous. Look, Sergeant, please. They told me to log it as an accident. Don't make this harder. Elisa lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She understood now. No one here was going to help her. Not Patterson. Not Keller. Not the system. But she still had one advantage. She'd kept her duplicate files. And she'd sent them off base before this morning. The email was gone, but the evidence was safe. That night, while the rest of Bravo Company celebrated the end of a training cycle, Elisa sat alone by the window of her small barracks room, ice pressed to her temple. The base lights cast long shadows across the walls. Danvers entered quietly, closing the door behind her. I heard what happened, she whispered. Are you okay? I will be, Elisa said. Danvers hesitated, then slid something across the desk. A USB drive. I copied a video from training last week. They don't know I have it. You should. Elisa looked at her, stunned. Why are you helping me? Danvers' eyes filled with tears. Because I'm tired of being afraid. Elisa closed her hand over the drive. Then you just made the bravest move on this base. When Danvers left, Elisa plugged the drive into her laptop. The video loaded grainy, but clear. It showed Kane shoving a recruit to the ground, yelling, then turning toward the camera. The sound of his laughter filled the small room. Elisa stared at the screen for a long time, the bruise on her temple throbbing in time with her heartbeat. Then she whispered, "It's over, Kane." She didn't know when or how, but she knew one thing for certain. His reckoning was coming. And when it did, it wouldn't just be his downfall. It would shake Fort Redwood to its core. Rain fell hard over Fort Redwood that Friday morning, soaking the parade ground into a swamp of mud and tension. Elisa Monroe stood under the thin roof of the training shed, helmet strapped, clipboard tucked beneath her arm. Her head still ached from the concussion, but she wasn't about to let Kane see weakness. Today was Extreme Endurance Day, a brutal test meant to simulate battlefield stress. But to Elisa, it was little more than a sanctioned display of control. Kane had organized it himself, and she knew he'd push the limits, just to make a point. Across the field, soldiers crawled through mud while instructors shouted. Rain mixed with sweat, and every few minutes, a body dropped from exhaustion. Elisa moved between them, checking vitals, forcing herself to stay calm. But inside, her nerves were wiretight. Kane stalked through the chaos like a predator. He caught her eye once, his smirk unreadable, and she felt the old chill crawl up her spine. She tried to focus on the recruits. Hydrate. Keep your mask on. A scream cut through the downpour. Elisa spun around. A recruit lay face down in the mud, motionless. She sprinted over, kneeling beside him. "No pulse," she said. "He's overheated." Kane appeared behind her. "Get him up. He needs rest, Captain. His core temp is too high." "That's an order, Monroe." Elisa looked up, rain dripping down her face. "You'll kill him." Kane's eyes went cold. He grabbed the recruit by his vest and yanked him upright. The soldier's head lolled. Elisa shoved Kane back. "Stop." And that was it, the spark that ignited everything. Kane's hand shot out. His palm cracked across her cheek, hard enough to whip her head sideways. Gasps rippled through the ranks. Elisa stumbled, but before she could recover, he stepped forward and kicked her, straight in the head. The world blurred. Mud splashed. For a few seconds, there was only the dull ringing in her ears and a taste of iron in her mouth. "Lesson 1, Kane snarled over her. "You follow orders." He turned back to the recruits, shouting, "Everyone back to work." You didn't see anything. But they had seen. Every single one of them. Elisa lay motionless, half-conscious, rain pouring over her face. Somewhere in the background, Danvers screamed her name. Someone radioed for medevac. The rest froze, paralyzed between fear and fury. When Elisa woke, fluorescent lights glared above her. She was in the infirmary, 4 in her arm, bandages around her skull. Her body ached from head to toe. A voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't be awake yet." It was Lieutenant Danvers. Her uniform was soaked, her eyes red from crying. Elisa's throat felt like sandpaper. "What happened?" Danvers swallowed hard. "You took a hit to the temple. He kicked you. Hard. They tried to call it a training accident, but... Elisa rasped. Danvers hesitated. Someone filmed it. Elisa's heart skipped. Who? One of the new recruits. He was testing his helmet cam. It caught everything. He's terrified, but he came to me. Elisa's eyes narrowed. Where's the footage? In my locker. But Keller's already looking for it. He knows. Elisa exhaled shakily. Then we moved fast. 2 hours later, while the base slept under a blanket of thunder, Danvers slipped into Elisa's room with a duffel bag. I pulled the video, she whispered. Copied it twice. One's on this drive. The other's on the recruit's phone. Elisa sat up slowly, wincing. You're saving lives, Danvers. But they both knew this wasn't over. Once the command learned the footage existed, they'd bury it, or worse, them. Elisa took the drive and inserted it into her laptop. The video flickered to life. Despite the rain and static, the image was clear. Cain, towering over her, rage etched into his face. Then the violent kick that sent her collapsing into the mud. Elisa watched it without flinching. This is enough, she said. He can't silence this. But as she reached for her phone, a knock echoed on the door. Danvers froze. That's not good. Keller's voice came from outside. Sergeant Monroe, open up. They looked at each other. Elisa whispered, backup plan. She pulled out her satellite hotspot, a relic from deployment, and connected it. Within seconds, the footage began uploading to her secure cloud server. Keller's pounding grew louder. Sergeant, now. Elisa typed a final message to her contact in the Inspector General's office. This is the proof. Fort Redwood. Abuse. Cover-up. Request immediate intervention. Then she hit send, just as the door burst open. Keller entered with 2 MPs. His eyes went straight to the laptop. What are you doing? Following procedure, Elisa said coolly. Reporting an assault. He motioned to the MPs. Confiscate it. Danvers stepped between them. You can't. That's evidence. Out of the way, Lieutenant, Keller snapped. But Elisa only smiled faintly. It's already gone. Keller froze. What? Upload it, she said. And not just to the Inspector General. Pentagon Internal Affairs, too. You can destroy the laptop, but not the truth. Keller's face turned red. You've just ended your career. No, Elisa said softly. I just saved everyone else's. By morning, Fort Redwood was chaos. Investigators arrived unannounced in black SUVs, their insignias marking them from the Department of the Army Criminal Investigation Division, SEAD. Commanders were pulled from offices, files seized, communications locked down. Whispers spread faster than wildfire. A video. A cover-up. A medic beaten unconscious by her superior. Cain was arrested mid-training. The soldiers watched in silence as 2 MPs cuffed him and led him past the same field where it had happened. His face was blank, but his eyes burned with hate. Captain Keller tried to argue jurisdiction, until one of the investigators showed him a printed email. Elisa's email. Signed, time-stamped, undeniable. Within hours, the base commander, Colonel Patterson, was escorted to the main tent. There, 3 visiting generals sat waiting, their expressions carved from stone. This base has been compromised by corruption and abuse, one said. Effective immediately, Fort Redwood's training operations are suspended. Patterson opened his mouth to protest, but the general cut him off. We saw the footage. There's nothing left to argue. That evening, as the storm finally cleared, Elisa sat outside the infirmary in a wheelchair, wrapped in a blanket. Danvers stood beside her, silent. Across the field, soldiers packed their gear into trucks. The once proud Bravo Company was being disbanded, effective immediately. The banners were stripped down, the gates locked. Danvers looked at her quietly. You did it. Elisa shook her head. We did it. Still, Danvers said softly, they kicked you in the head, and 3 generals showed up the next day. That's not coincidence. Elisa smiled faintly. No, That's justice finally waking up. Later, as she was preparing for discharge, a young recruit approached her. The same one who had filmed everything. "Ma'am," he said, voice trembling, "I'm sorry it happened, but thank you. You made it stop." Alyssa met his eyes. "Don't thank me. Just remember, silence protects no one." He nodded, saluting her before walking away. For the first time in months, Alyssa felt a strange peace settle in her chest. The cost had been brutal. Pain, humiliation, nearly her life. But the truth had won. And even as the lights of Fort Redwood dimmed behind her, she knew this wasn't the end. Because sometimes, real change doesn't come from those in command. It comes from the ones who refuse to look away. The morning after Fort Redwood shut down, the base felt like a ghost town. The banners were gone. Training fields were silent, except for the wind pushing through broken fences. Trucks lined the gate, loaded with confiscated files and boxed evidence. Sergeant Alyssa Monroe watched from the back seat of an Army transport vehicle as they rolled past the parade ground, the same place where she had been kicked, humiliated, and silenced. Now it was empty. Beside her sat Lieutenant Danvers, quiet, her uniform pressed and eyes hollow from exhaustion. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The silence said everything. The storm had passed, but the wreckage was still there. When they reached the regional hospital, Alyssa was escorted inside by military investigators. She was due for a medical evaluation, concussion follow-up, they said. But she knew it was more than that. She was now both a victim and a witness in an official investigation that would shape the Army's core. Days turned into weeks. Alyssa's head wound healed, but her nights were restless. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Kane's boot swinging toward her face. The sound, that hollow, sickening impact, played on repeat. Doctors called it trauma. She called it a scar that refused to fade. Her room at the Military Rehabilitation Center overlooked a small lake. She often sat by the window, watching. Ducks skim across the surface while she wrote in her notebook. She wasn't allowed on active duty, not until the inquiry was complete. Her phone stayed silent most days, except for messages from Danvers. Investigators interviewed me again. They have the footage. Kane's under arrest, Article 93, and assault charges confirmed. Keller's been relieved. Patterson's pending tribunal. Each message was a small piece of justice. But justice, Alyssa knew, moved painfully slow. 2 weeks later, the media caught wind of the story. It began with a headline on a military watchdog site. Sergeant assaulted during training. Army shuts down Texas facility. Then national outlets picked it up. CNN, NBC, The Washington Post, all with slightly different angles. Hero medic exposes abuse inside use training base. Fort Redwood scandal sparks internal overhaul. Alyssa's phone began ringing non-stop. Journalists, advocacy groups, old colleagues, everyone wanted her comment, but she said nothing. She wasn't chasing fame. She just wanted the truth to survive without distortion. Still, the world was talking. Hashtags trended. Congress demanded explanations. And behind closed doors, generals whispered about damage control. One afternoon, Alyssa was summoned to testify in Washington. The military arranged quiet transport. No reporters, no cameras, just a convoy to the Pentagon's East Wing. When she entered the hearing room, her heart thudded against her ribs. Across the table sat 3 high-ranking officers, the same generals who had ordered Fort Redwood shut down. Their expressions were grim, but respectful. "Sergeant Monroe," the eldest began, "you've endured a great injustice. We've reviewed the evidence, the video, the emails, the logs. It's clear you acted in accordance with duty." Alyssa kept her voice steady. "I wasn't trying to be a hero, sir. I was just trying to stop them." The general nodded. Sometimes that's what makes one. He leaned forward. We want your help, Sergeant. We're forming a new oversight initiative to prevent another Fort Redwood. Soldiers will be trained to report abuse safely outside the chain of command. We'd like you to consult. Elisa hesitated. You want me to go back into the system that tried to destroy me? We want you to change it, he said simply. She looked down, the words sinking deep. Maybe that was the purpose behind all the pain, not just to survive it, but to make sure no one else had to. I'll do it, she said quietly. That night, in her hotel room overlooking the city, Elisa sat by the window again. Below her, the streets pulsed with lights. A world full of noise and movement. Yet all she could hear was the faint echo of Kane's voice, the one that used to haunt her. You'll never win, she smiled faintly. Watch me. Meanwhile, the military court convened for Kane's trial. The prosecution presented the footage, clear, damning, impossible to refute. The courtroom fell silent as the moment replayed. Kane kicking Elisa in the head, rain pouring, recruits frozen in shock. He didn't deny it. His defense was discipline protocol, but the judges weren't buying it. When the verdict was read, guilty on multiple counts of assault, dereliction of duty, and abuse of authority, Elisa sat in the back row, spine straight, expression unreadable. Kane was sentenced to dishonorable discharge and 5 years confinement at Fort Leavenworth. As MPs led him away, he turned his head slightly toward her. No words, just a look, rage mixed with disbelief. Elisa didn't flinch. He was finally leaving her world behind. After the trial, reporters waited outside the courthouse. Microphones, flashes, questions shouted over each other. Sergeant Monroe, do you think justice was served? What message do you have for other soldiers facing abuse? Will you continue your service? Elisa stopped at the steps, rain misting her hair. She looked straight into the cameras. I didn't fight for revenge, she said. I fought because silence kills people, not just physically, but inside. Every soldier deserves safety, respect, and a voice. I'll never stop fighting for that. Then she walked away, ignoring the storm of flashes behind her. Weeks passed. Her name became a symbol, not of scandal, but of change. The Army launched Operation Shieldline, a new whistleblower protection system inspired by her case. Training bases across the country were audited. New reporting protocols were installed. And for the first time in her career, Elisa received a personal letter from the Secretary of the Army, thanking her for extraordinary courage in the face of institutional failure. But none of it erased the nightmares. Sometimes, late at night, she'd still wake sweating, reaching for her sidearm that wasn't there. She'd see Kane's boot, feel the mud against her skin. She'd hear the laughter that followed. Trauma doesn't vanish when justice arrives. It lingers, quieter but constant. Still, every morning, she got up, walked to the mirror, and reminded herself, I'm still standing. And that, she decided, was victory enough. Months later, Elisa returned to Fort Redwood, now decommissioned, its buildings fenced off, training grounds overgrown with weeds. The wind carried silence through the empty corridors where soldiers once shouted. She walked slowly across the field, stopping at the spot where she'd fallen. The mud was dry now, cracked by the sun. She knelt down, running her fingers through the dirt. This is where it ended, she whispered, and where it began. Behind her, Danvers approached, carrying a folded flag. Command said they're donating the baseland to veteran rehabilitation projects, she said softly. Elisa smiled. Good. Let something new grow here. Danvers nodded. You ready to go? Elisa looked around one last time. The watchtower, the barracks, the ghosts of what once was. And she stood. Yeah, it's time. As they drove away, Sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the horizon gold. Alyssa watched it quietly, her reflection merging with the sky in the window. She knew life after Fort Redwood wouldn't be easy. Healing never was. But she also knew something more powerful than fear had replaced it. Purpose. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it begins with one woman, broken but unyielding, standing in the rain and saying, "No more." And that voice, bruised but brave, can shake even the strongest walls. 6 months had passed since Fort Redwood fell silent. What once was a fortress of command and control had become a symbol of reckoning. The day a soldier refused to stay quiet and forced the army to look at itself in the mirror. For Alyssa Monroe, life had shifted from military drills to policy meetings. From dusty parade grounds to glass-walled conference rooms in Washington, D.C., she had traded her fatigues for a blazer, her field notes for testimony. Yet, inside, the soldier still lived, restless, alert, waiting for a fight. Every morning, she walked into the Pentagon through the same entrance as generals and politicians. But no matter how many badges she wore, she never forgot where she came from. The mud, the screams, the silence that almost swallowed her whole. She was now part of Operation Shieldline, the oversight initiative born from her case. Her role, advising on ground-level abuse reporting, ensuring soldiers could speak up without fear. But bureaucracy was another kind of battlefield. At her first committee meeting, a colonel interrupted her mid-sentence. "With all due respect, Sergeant Monroe, you're here because of one bad incident. You can't paint the entire army as corrupt." Alyssa leaned forward, unflinching. "With all due respect, sir, I'm here because one bad incident almost killed me, and because silence made it possible." The room fell quiet. Her tone was calm, but her words carried weight. Another general cleared his throat. "We're not denying the problem, Sergeant, but reforms take time. You can't change culture overnight." Alyssa smiled faintly. "Then we start today." Outside the conference room, reporters waited for her. She'd learned to navigate their chaos, cameras flashing, questions flying. "Sergeant Monroe, is the Army doing enough to protect whistleblowers? Do you believe Fort Redwood was an isolated case?" She stopped, faced them, and said, "It's never about one base. It's about every voice that's afraid to speak. Until that fear is gone, our job isn't done." Her words hit headlines again. The public saw a hero, calm, articulate, unbreakable. But behind that image was a woman who barely slept and woke up to migraines that reminded her of the kick that started it all. Some nights, she'd sit alone in her apartment, scrolling through messages from soldiers around the country. "Ma'am, I saw what you did. I'm going through something similar. They told me to shut up, but I won't, not after hearing your story. You gave me courage. Thank you." Each message filled her with pride and pain. Because for every soldier who reached out, she knew dozens stayed silent, still trapped in fear. One afternoon, as she left a Capitol Hill meeting, a familiar face appeared near her car. "Lieutenant Danvers," Alyssa said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Danvers smiled weakly. "Promoted to captain. I'm assigned to the new Internal Review Board." "That's amazing." Danvers hesitated. "It should be. But Alyssa, there's something you should know." She glanced around, lowering her voice. "There's talk about shutting Shieldline down. Too much media attention. Too many disruptions to protocol. Some higher-ups think you've become inconvenient." Alyssa's jaw tightened. "Inconvenient?" Danvers nodded. "You're scaring people who've worn stars for too long." Alyssa crossed her arms. "Good. Maybe they'll finally wake up." But as Danvers drove away, the words stayed with her. She knew how power worked. It smiled in daylight, then struck in shadows. A week later, she was summoned unexpectedly to a private meeting at the Pentagon. Inside, two men in suits waited, not military, but government. Their badges read Office of Defense Oversight. "Sergeant Monroe," one began smoothly, "we appreciate your service and the reforms your case inspired. However, your continued public appearances have complicated ongoing inquiries." Alyssa frowned. "Complicated how?" He smiled without warmth. "You're becoming a political figure. That's dangerous for the institution." "I didn't ask to be a figure," she said sharply. "I asked for accountability." The second man leaned back. "Sometimes accountability and national image don't align." Alyssa stared at them, disgusted. "So you want me quiet again?" "No," the first man said. "We're suggesting cooperation, fewer interviews, no public comments without clearance. In return, we'll fund Shield Line indefinitely." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she stood. "You can keep your funding. I didn't fight for silence the first time, and I won't start now." She walked out before they could respond. That night, her apartment felt colder than usual. Rain tapped against the window as she reread an article on her laptop. "Army hero turns bureaucrat. Has Monroe gone too far?" The media that once praised her was starting to twist the story. Some claimed she was milking the spotlight. Others accused her of undermining morale. Alyssa closed the laptop and stared into the dark. "They'll try to rewrite it," she whispered. Just like before. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. A quiet voice said, "Sergeant Monroe? This is Specialist Rivera from Fort Drake. I need help." Alyssa sat upright. "What happened?" "It's the same thing," Rivera said, voice shaking. "Drills turning violent. They hurt one of us. Our commander says it's training, but—" "Stop," Alyssa said, already grabbing a notepad. "Send me everything you have, names, dates, medical logs. And keep copies off base." "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you." As the call ended, Alyssa leaned back, heart pounding. It was happening again. Different base, same sickness. She realized the truth. Fort Redwood wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a war she hadn't yet finished fighting. The next morning, she marched into Shield Line headquarters. Danvers looked up, startled. "Alyssa, you okay?" Alyssa set a folder on the table. "No, but we're going to fix this." Inside were Rivera's reports, photos of bruised recruits, and forged medical documents, identical patterns to what had happened at Fort Redwood. Danvers flipped through them, her face pale. "My God, it's spreading." Alyssa shook her head. "No, it's always been there. We just finally started to see it." Over the following weeks, Alyssa worked in secret, compiling evidence and testimonies. She used her growing network of soldiers, whistleblowers who trusted her, to trace a pattern of abuse across multiple training centers. Late nights blurred into early mornings. Coffee replaced sleep. Her desk became a battlefield of files and handwritten notes. One night, as she typed her final report, she paused, hand trembling slightly. Her doctor had warned her about stress and recurring migraines, but she ignored it. The mission came first. Finally, she hit send. The report went to the Inspector General, Congress, and several journalists she trusted. Within days, news broke again. Second military scandal emerges, linked to Fort Redwood whistleblower. The story exploded. Shield Line was flooded with reports. The Pentagon was forced to open nationwide investigations. And Alyssa? She became the face of reform again, this time not by accident, but by choice. But behind the headlines, pressure built. She began receiving anonymous threats, emails, letters. One even slipped under her door. "You should have stayed quiet. You're making enemies who don't forgive." She read it once, then burned it in the sink. Danvers found her later, eyes tired but steady. They won't stop. I know, Alyssa said. But neither will I. Months later, during a televised congressional session, Alyssa sat before a packed audience. Cameras rolled. Lawmakers leaned in. Sergeant Monroe, one senator asked, after everything you've endured, the attack, the investigations, the threats, why keep fighting? Alyssa paused, looking around the room. Because silence almost killed me, she said. And if I stop now, it'll kill someone else. The room erupted in applause. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras zoomed in on her face. Not angry, not triumphant, just resolute. And somewhere deep inside, Alyssa felt the soldier in her finally stand tall again. That night, as she walked alone through D.C.'s quiet streets, the city lights glowed against the river. She stopped at the reflection of the Capitol in the water. Bright, powerful, untouchable. She whispered. One base fell. Now it's your turn. Her reflection stared back, scar faint beneath her hairline, eyes clear and unafraid. Alyssa Monroe wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a force, and the system had no idea how much louder she could still get. The news cycle had exploded once more. Headlines flashing across every major outlet, social media burning with outrage, soldiers sharing stories under the #ShieldLineTruth. Alyssa Monroe had become more than a soldier, more than a whistleblower. She was now the face of reform, the woman who dared to challenge the might of the United States Army, and won twice. But with every headline came a shadow. Inside the Pentagon, behind layers of classified meetings, powerful figures murmured her name, not with respect, but resentment. Late one night, Alyssa sat alone at the Shield Line office, surrounded by dim computer screens and half-empty coffee cups. Reports flooded her inbox, soldiers from Alaska to Texas, each describing the same story in different words. Abuse, retaliation, silence. She read each one, heart heavy, hands trembling. The sheer scale of corruption was staggering. It wasn't a few bad officers. It was systemic. She looked at the whiteboard in front of her, filled with names, dates, and arrows connecting bases. Red circles marked the worst offenders. Fort Redwood, Fort Drake, Camp Bellman. It looked less like a map of an army, and more like a web of rot. Danvers entered quietly, setting down 2 coffees. You've been here since morning. Couldn't sleep, Alyssa murmured. Every time I close my eyes, I see that kick again. And I keep asking myself, how many more are getting kicked right now? Danvers hesitated. You can't save everyone. Alyssa's eyes met hers, cold and tired. Maybe not, but I can make damn sure they don't stay hidden anymore. The next day brought another storm. Her assistant rushed in, pale. Alyssa, the Pentagon just suspended Shield Line's funding. Alyssa froze. What? They're citing procedural violations and classified data leaks. They're also investigating you. Alyssa's stomach twisted. On what grounds? The assistant swallowed. They're saying you leaked internal documents to the press. Alyssa slammed her fist against the desk. That's a lie. They're framing me? Danvers entered moments later, holding a printed memo. It's worse than that. They're accusing you of compromising national security. The room fell silent. Alyssa stared at the paper, words blurring in her vision. They're not just trying to silence me. They're trying to erase me. That night, she received an encrypted message on her laptop, an address and a time. No sender. She hesitated, then grabbed her coat. At 11:30 p.m., she arrived at a small diner on the edge of Arlington. The neon lights flickered as rain drizzled on the empty parking lot. A man sat in a corner booth, half hidden by shadows. He looked military, Cropped hair, rigid posture, but his badge wasn't visible. "Sergeant Monroe," he said quietly as she slid into the seat. "You don't know me, but I've been watching your case. Who are you?" "Let's just say I work where the real files go when they disappear." He slid a flash drive across the table. "This is what they don't want you to see." Alyssa hesitated. "What's on it?" "Internal memos. Emails between senior officers. Orders to bury reports, including yours. They're covering up more than you think." Alyssa's breath caught. "Why give this to me?" He looked her in the eyes. "Because what they're doing isn't just wrong. It's dangerous. But once you open that, they'll come for you harder than ever." She pocketed the drive. "They already are." The moment she got home, she opened her laptop and decrypted the files. What she saw made her skin crawl. Direct orders from generals, commanding investigations to be redirected, cases to be handled internally, victims labeled as unstable. And at the center of it all, General Maxwell Harlan, the same general who had first tried to defend the unit at Fort Redwood before it was shut down. He wasn't just complicit. He was orchestrating the cover-up. Alyssa leaned back, shaking. "You bastard," she whispered. She realized what she had now wasn't just evidence. It was dynamite. The next morning, she showed the files to Danvers. Danvers read in silence, eyes widening. "This is huge. This could destroy him." "It's not just him," Alyssa said. "It's everyone who signed off on these. We have to go public, all of it." Danvers hesitated. "If we leak this, we'll both lose our clearances. Maybe even face charges." Alyssa looked out the window, where the flag fluttered above the Pentagon. "You think I care about clearances anymore?" Danvers exhaled, then nodded. "Then let's finish what we started." They spent the next 3 days preparing the release. Alyssa verified every file, every signature. They compiled timelines, statements, corroborating testimonies. By the fourth night, they had built a dossier that could topple half the Army's leadership. But they weren't alone. At 2 a.m., as Alyssa was finalizing the upload, she noticed something. Her laptop camera light flickered. She froze. Someone was watching. Within minutes, her screen went black. Then a new message appeared. "You were warned. Stop now, or your story ends tonight." A chill ran through her. She grabbed her phone and called Danvers. No answer. Then, a knock at her door. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Her heart raced. She reached for her phone again, ready to call 911. But before she could, a familiar voice whispered through the door. "Alyssa." "It's me." She opened it. Danvers stood there, drenched in rain, eyes wide. "They know. Someone broke into Shield Line. They took everything, our hard drives, files, everything." Alyssa's pulse pounded. "Did you copy the data?" "I backed it up. But they're tracing us." Alyssa grabbed her coat. "Then we move fast. We go to the press tonight." They drove through D.C. in silence, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. Danvers gripped the wheel, knuckles white. Alyssa stared out the window, every muscle tense. Finally, Danvers asked, "You think they'll try to stop us?" "They already are," Alyssa said. "But truth has a way of surviving." They reached the office of journalist Evan Laird, one of the few reporters who had stood by Alyssa since the beginning. He opened the door, took one look at their faces, and said, "Come in." "Lock it." Within an hour, the files were uploaded to secure servers. Laird read through them, eyes widening. This is explosive. When this goes live, it'll shake the entire military command." Alyssa nodded. "Then post it." He hesitated. "Alyssa, you realize what this means? They'll come after you harder than ever." She smiled faintly. "Let them." I've been kicked in the head and left for dead. I can handle a few more blows. Laird hit publish. By sunrise, the story was everywhere. Whistleblower exposes massive military cover-up. Generals named in secret abuse network. Cable news erupted. Congress called emergency hearings. Harlan's office went silent. Soldiers across the country started posting messages of solidarity. But the backlash was immediate. Anonymous officials called it treason. Some accused her of fabricating evidence. And then, just as Alyssa predicted, the smear campaign began. Old photos of her surfaced online. Unstable, attention-seeking, disgraced sergeant, word spread like wildfire. Danvers threw her phone down in disgust. They're trying to destroy you. Alyssa sat quietly, staring at the chaos on TV. Let them talk. The truth's already out there, and this time they can't bury it. That evening, as she left the Shield Line office under escort, she received a call from an unknown number. She answered. A deep, steady voice said, "You just declared war, Sergeant Monroe." The line went dead. Alyssa stood still, the city's lights flickering around her. For a brief second, fear gripped her chest, but then it passed, replaced by the same fire that had carried her through everything. She whispered to herself, "Then I guess it's time they learned who they're fighting." Outside, the rain stopped. The clouds parted just enough for the moon to shine over Washington, D.C. inside. Alyssa walked toward her office window and looked at the skyline, the monuments, the flags, the lights of power flickering like candles waiting to be blown out. The next battle wouldn't be fought with weapons, but with truth, and Alyssa Monroe was ready to strike again. The storm of controversy didn't subside. Across the United States, headlines blared Alyssa Monroe's name. Every news outlet carried the story of Fort Redwood, the leaked files, and the systemic abuse the Army had tried to hide. Inside the Pentagon, chaos reigned. Generals and colonels scrambled, advisors whispered, and emails flew faster than any soldier could march. The halls of power were alive with panic, but Alyssa didn't feel it. She was outside the fray, standing tall as the truth's unflinching voice. She'd learned long ago that courage wasn't loud. It was consistent. And now, her consistency was forcing a reckoning. Congress convened an emergency hearing on military abuse. Alyssa sat at the witness table, flanked by Danvers and a team of legal advisors. The room was packed. Cameras, microphones, the press corps, lawmakers leaning forward in anticipation. Senator Whitmore, chair of the Armed Services Committee, opened with a stern voice. "Sergeant Monroe, thank you for your courage. We've reviewed your evidence. Today, we need you to tell the American people what happened at Fort Redwood and beyond." Alyssa straightened, her head still faintly throbbing from past injuries. She inhaled slowly, then began. For years, soldiers have suffered in silence. Abuse wasn't isolated. It was systematic. Officers who swore to protect us were complicit in harming us. Fort Redwood was only the tip of the iceberg. She paused, letting her words sink in. I was kicked in the head during training. I was almost silenced permanently. But I survived, and because of that, the truth came out. There was a hush. A low murmur passed through the audience. Alyssa continued, her voice unwavering. Today, we have the opportunity to ensure no soldier ever endures this in silence again. Oversight, accountability, and protection for whistleblowers are not optional. They are essential. Her testimony went viral within hours. Social media lit up with support. Soldiers shared personal stories, videos, and messages of solidarity. At the same time, the backlash intensified. Anonymous officials, some still inside the military, attempted to smear her. They labeled her disruptive, reckless, dangerous to morale. But Alyssa had anticipated this. She kept her focus on the bigger picture, the reforms, the exposed abuses, and the lives saved. Within days, General Maxwell Harlan was suspended pending a formal investigation. Other senior officers involved in cover-ups faced administrative action. The Army had no choice but to respond. Shieldline received official recognition, its funding restored and expanded nationwide. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Back in her apartment, Elisa sat by the window, overlooking the city at night. The streets shimmered with wet reflections from a recent rain, lights bouncing like fragments of hope. Danvers joined her, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "They finally acknowledged Shieldline," Danvers said softly. Elisa didn't answer immediately. She stared at the city, thinking of every recruit, every soldier who had suffered in silence. She thought of Kane, the generals, and all the officers who tried to bury the truth. Finally, she said, "This isn't about acknowledgement. It's about change. Real change. And we have a long way to go." Danvers placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than anyone could have imagined." Elisa smiled faintly. "Maybe, but I can't stop. Not when so many are still counting on us." Weeks later, she returned to Fort Redwood, not as a soldier, not as a victim, but as a witness to history. The base was decommissioned, gates chained, fields overgrown with weeds. The once hallowed grounds were quiet, almost peaceful. She walked to the spot where Kane had kicked her. Mud had dried long ago, leaving only traces of the past. Elisa knelt, touching the cracked earth. She whispered, "This is where it ended, and where it began." Behind her, Danvers approached, carrying a folded flag from the decommissioned base. Together, they raised it at the center of the training ground, a symbol not of shame, but of accountability and hope. "This flag," Danvers said quietly, "represents every soldier who couldn't speak, and every soldier who survived because someone did." Elisa nodded, her eyes misty. "May it remind everyone that courage starts with one voice, and one voice can change everything." The following months were intense. Shieldline expanded, receiving reports from bases nationwide. Elisa became a sought-after consultant, appearing before committees, advising military leaders, and testifying in courts-martial. She trained officers on accountability, ethics, and transparency. Despite the accolades, she remained grounded. Nights were still difficult. Memories of the kick, the screams, the rain, all haunted her. But each day, she reminded herself that fear had already lost. She had survived, fought, and prevailed. Then came the final reckoning. General Harlan was court-martialed. The evidence Elisa had uncovered, emails, internal memos, testimonies, formed the backbone of the case. Harlan attempted to defend himself, claiming orders were standard procedure and allegations were exaggerated. But the video footage of Fort Redwood, combined with Elisa's meticulous documentation and countless testimonies, left no room for doubt. He was convicted on multiple counts of abuse of authority, dereliction of duty, and obstruction of justice. He received a sentence of 10 years confinement and a dishonorable discharge. Other officers implicated faced similar consequences. For Elisa, it was vindication, not vengeance, but accountability. On the day the verdict was read, Elisa sat quietly in the courtroom. Her jaw was tight, her hands folded. As the gavel came down, she exhaled, a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and triumph. Danvers leaned close. "It's finally over." Elisa shook her head. "No, this is the beginning of a new standard. The beginning of trust returning." The media outside captured her leaving the courthouse, calm, composed, resolute. Her words would echo for years. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about ensuring that abuse can never hide again. Every soldier deserves safety. Every soldier deserves a voice. And today, we've taken the first step toward that future. Years later, Elisa visited a military academy as a guest speaker. Young cadets filled the auditorium, eager eyes fixed on her. She told them the story, not just of Fort Redwood, but of courage, persistence, and integrity. Leadership, she said, isn't about rank. It's about responsibility. And if you see something wrong, you don't look away. Because silence protects no one. The students sat in rapt attention. Some took notes. Others simply listened, absorbing the weight of her experience. After the speech, a young cadet approached. "Ma'am, thank you. You gave me hope that I can make a difference too." Elisa smiled, a rare, genuine warmth lighting her face. "Then do it. And don't ever let anyone tell you it's too hard." As she left the academy grounds, Elisa paused, looking out at the horizon. The sun was setting, painting the sky in gold and crimson. She thought of Fort Redwood, of mud, rain, and the kick that had changed her life forever. Her life had been altered irreversibly, yet she carried no bitterness, only determination. She whispered into the wind, "We fought, we endured, and we won. But the fight for justice never ends. And neither will I." Elisa Monroe walked forward. Head held high, the scars of the past etched on her body and soul. But the future wide open, a life defined not by what she endured, but by the courage she inspired.